The biodiversity of life and species on our Earth. The biodiversity of life is so important in our world, and there are so many effects that are causing the biodiversity of life to come to a close. For example, that last picture of the polar bears, that was an example of climate change, which is causing the habitat of the polar bears to melt, basically, and that leaves them with no home, and they have to survive on other resources to provide themselves for a home. The image before that one, right, this one, is the one with the flooding. That is causing the forest to become very watery and takes away the life of animals living in the forest. And that picture with the car is also an example of forests being destroyed by human activity, which can take away the life of many species on our Earth and causing many to become extinct. This is an example of invasive species coming into native species and ruining possibly the food chain or any other thing that might affect other species from surviving and causing them to become more endangered. This is an example, that last image of the giraffe and the zebra is a preserve for animals that helps them to keep reproducing and helps them from becoming endangered. This is also another preserve, the Alfonso Preserve, and that is another example of preserves that kept animals from becoming extinct and endangered. And then the bison, obviously in this picture, is another preserve, a very, very large land. This topic is very important. It is the wildlife monitoring, and what this does is it monitors the animals, and it tracks how well they're doing. If they're doing well, then they will keep it that way. If they're not doing well, they might have to change the habitat in which the animals are living in and in which they are monitoring. This is also another example of people monitoring the animals in this desert area. And this is a group of people monitoring this was the lemurs, and they were monitoring the lemurs to see how well they were doing a month before they started monitoring and a month after, and they were seeing the growth of how many lemurs were being produced and how they were adapting to that environment. And this is another example of elephants being monitored and how well they are surviving together as a pack, and how much they are growing and not keeping them from becoming endangered. This is also another example of this was the reptiles and how these reptiles were becoming saved and help save the biodiversity of that rainforest. This is a very dramatic cause that is causing us to lose biodiversity on Earth. This is a destruction of habitats, which causes people to think that this Earth was built for buildings and people to live, but we also have to remember that there are other species on this Earth that need to live, and if we don't keep those species going, that could have a great effect on us and how we live. And again, this is another example of forests being burned down. This was an example of it was around the Asian area of the forests. And this is an example of the trees being cut down. They were going to put a I think it was a lodge here, and they just absolutely tore down the forest that these animals were living in, which is causing them to become more extinct and is decreasing the amount of animals in that area. This is a panda who is surviving on the limited food it has because we are destroying its natural resources for food.